I want to thank you for making the time to be here to join the learning community for all of us to focus for this brief 2-hour period on professional boundaries. A very, very warm welcome and uh, greetings to everyone who may be joining the learning community for the first time. I had the opportunity to meet Ronald early on. So again, I want to welcome anybody who's joining the learning community for the first time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the time to be here. And for those of you whom I've had the honor and privilege to be in a learning community with before, thanks for coming back and for participating in this conversation. Just by way of brief introduction, my name is Paul Warren, and I am presently a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. I'm also a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And that does mean, believe it or not, Opal, at times I'm forced to go to Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, or St. Croix to deliver training. But it's been a long time since I've been forced. So I'm just putting it out there. I could go. I am. It's a tough job, but somebody's got it. It's a rough task, yes. I'm also a social worker by training. I'm a graduate of Hunter College School of Social Work, and I began my social service career in 1991, providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS. And I did that for a little over 12 years. And then I made the transition specifically into curriculum development, workforce development, and the provision of technical assistance. Very, very, very happy to have the opportunity for all of us to be together today as a learning community to focus on Go Social Workers, to focus on professional boundaries. Now, before I share the slides and we start sharing the slides and take care of a couple of technical or housekeeping details, I do want to make a statement that I'd like you to be pondering and that maybe we can talk about a little bit before we kind of officially start to uncover and unwrap and review this particular content. And that statement is this, and this is what I'd like you to ponder, and we can discuss it. Many of us in this learning community may be, as per our licenses, if we indeed have them, and I don't mean a driver's license, I mean our practice license, as per our licensure or our profession, or even our organization, our company policies, we may be mandated is too strong of a word, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's an accurate word. We may be mandated to have to participate at least annually, at least once a year. We may be mandated to have to participate in a learning community conversation on ethics and professional boundaries. I don't know. I know for my profession that for social work, that is the case. So I don't know if that's the case for anybody else here. And what I'd like to point out or invite you to ponder is that for the most part, if you really think about it, the content of what we're going to discuss doesn't necessarily change on a year-by-year basis. There are some very clear considerations that we need to be thinking about in terms of professional boundaries and ethics that remain fairly consistent. So the information we cover may not actually be new. But the thing that I'm inviting you to consider and to ponder, and maybe we'll talk about, it's a two-part. Part one is, why are we mandated possibly to have this conversation on an annual basis? If nothing changes, why are we still mandated to have this conversation? So that's ponder number one. Ponder number two is even if nothing changes, what do you see as the benefit or benefits of our coming together as a learning community to focus on and to talk about professional boundaries and ethics. So that's ponder part number 2. So be thinking about that, and we'll discuss it after I take care of a couple of logistics. And I'll just repeat the 2. 1, if nothing really changes, why are we mandated to revisit this topic on an annual basis? And 2, if we know that the boundaries and ethics, of course, there are evolutions and such, but what is the benefit of our coming together, or benefits of our coming together as a learning community on an annual basis to collaboratively discuss this topic? And that's ponder part number 2. Okay, so be thinking about that, and let's cover a couple of logistics. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and I just also want to acknowledge before I share my screen, we are now 91 learning community members strong. So again, thank you for making the time to be here and to add your experience and your voice to this conversation. I'm going to share my screen. Professional boundaries. Today is, believe it or not, October 11th. Halloween is not very far away. All right. So I've said this a couple of times already, and I will repeat it here. We now are 92 people strong in this learning community, and this learning community conversation is meant to be relevant and support your work. Because of the nature of that, the reality and the nature of that, what I talk about, what you talk about, what we consider and discuss as a learning community, because it will be relevant to us and hopefully supportive to us in our work, it may not officially or may not reflect the official position of our funder. And that's okay, because our funder wants these learning community conversations to actually be more than just checking a box and saying that you attended. Our funder is committed to making sure that the workforce has the support and tools that they need to be effective at what they're doing. So it's perfectly okay if, as we realistically and relevantly discuss this topic, if it does not reflect or maintain within the official positions of our funder. There are 95 of us in the learning community now, and how we talk to each other, the words we use as we talk to each other, actually matter. And what I'm going to ask all 96 of us now to consider in regard to that is that we are using words that intentionally create inclusivity, respect, and welcome for all 96 of us in this learning community. Words do have power, and we can choose to put people first. And I'm going to ask everybody to consider that as we move forward in this particular conversation. PowerPoint makes it absolutely official. Welcome, exclamation point. And let me also add welcome back, because I see some familiar faces, or saw them when I could. There will be a brief evaluation. I'm going to do my best before we conclude to leave a little bit of time, a few minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, because you should be able to complete the evaluation within 3 or 4 minutes. And I'm going to do my best. Sometimes I fail miserably and we go right up to the end, and then you do the evaluation, hopefully. But I'm going to do my best to leave a little time so you can complete the evaluation. This is the last time I will officially say it. If you have not already done so, please type your name or the names of anybody else that you're sharing your computer with who is participating in this learning community conversation. Please type your full name and where you're from in the chat, and please include their names if indeed you're participating. They're participating as well. A couple of additional guidelines in addition to the language guideline that I'm asking us all to consider. You may or may not know this or remember this, but when you actually registered for this learning community conversation, you actually agreed to have a working camera and a working microphone and to be on camera for the full duration of the learning community conversation. Now, I want to be realistic. I know that there may be a moment or two that you need to step away to attend to something, be it because we're not going to take a formal break. If you need to go to the restroom, if you need to, whatever you may need to do. What I am going to ask, though, is if you do need to step away, just send me a private message in this chat and say, I'll be right back. And then when you've come back, just join us. You don't need to tell me you're back, but you can just rejoin us. Again, turn your camera on and rejoin us. Now, please step away if you need to. Don't step out. Step out means that you're gone for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I will tell you that Zoom is a very good monitor of the distinction between stepping away and stepping out. Unfortunately, we cannot issue credit for stepping out. You have to be here and be participating for the full learning community conversation. And again, if you need to step away, if you need to attend to something, go right ahead. But again, please keep that as brief as you possibly can. Now, Ronald asked about this earlier, and thank you for doing so, Ronald. I'm going to repeat it here. I'm going to ask, because there are 100 of us in the learning community now, I'm going to ask that you remain muted unless, like Ronald demonstrated so clearly in the beginning, unless there's a question you want to ask, a comment that you want to make, something that you want to say. You are more than welcome to unmute and say, I'd like to add something here. I will also invite you, if I'm in the middle of saying something and you want to add something, you want to comment, you want to underline something, question, you can interrupt me. I don't mind being interrupted. In fact, I welcome it. What I would ask, though, is if Ronald or anybody else in the learning community has the floor, that you not interrupt Ronald or anybody else. You can interrupt me, but please don't interrupt anybody else. Please let them complete their point, finish their thought, and then if you want to add something else, question something, that's fine. But please don't interrupt anybody else, but you're more than welcome to interrupt me. The other thing is, because we're a learning community of 100 people, we don't all have to be on the same page. We certainly don't all have the same experience, and that's wonderful. That's what makes our learning community rich. And it's perfectly okay to not agree with something you may hear. And what I would simply ask is, within the frame of our learning community, pardon me, if you don't agree with something that you hear, what I would simply ask is that you at least remain open to listening to it. And then the final guideline that I'm going to ask everybody to consider is to make I statements. I will also do my best to do that as well. In my role, though, as a learning community facilitator, I may at a moment make a generalization, and I will try and preface it with I am about to make a generalization. But I will also do my best to make I statements. So those are the guidelines for our learning community. I'm going to advance to the next slide, but then I'm going to take the slides down because I'm going to ask for your visual or chat, if that's a word, confirmation that you're willing to accept the guidelines. So I'm going to bring that. Are people willing to accept those guidelines as our learning community guidelines? You can wave, you can give a thumbs up, you can, excellent, Pamela, you can do both. You can deposit directly into my checking account. I'm putting the number in the chat. I'm kidding. Now, oh, you can give Sabrina. That was amazing. Could you do that again? Watch, everybody watch Sabrina's tile. Oh my God, Opal can do it too. I guess my, excellent. Fantastic. Flying thumbs up. And by the way, I don't know if any, I'm sure your computers do this too, but like if you're like using your hands or whatever, the computer will think you're raising your hand and then it will do it for you. And trust me, fellow trainers and I have tried a variety of gestures. I won't name them, but some gestures they won't repeat. I don't know if anybody else has tried that. Excellent. So, folks, those are our guidelines as we are together as a learning community to focus on this. I thank you so much for that. All right, I'm going to go back to the slides for just a moment and keep pondering what I asked you to ponder, and I'll repeat it before we actually go into that conversation. There's a key word in this goal statement that is very relevant to what the two things, oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. The two things that I'm asking you to ponder. So take a moment and read this goal statement. And there's one word in particular, and this is where you can test your powers of extrasensory perception, also known as ESP. There's one word that I'm thinking of that really stands out to me in this sentence. And if you can read my mind or you want to take a guess at what that word is, go ahead and type it into the chat. And it's so wonderful because some great words are being typed into the chat, which is fantastic. And I'm not seeing anybody type the whole sentence into the chat as a way to be absolutely 100% that it's included. But I would like to acknowledge that Akira, who I believe is the first, and you hopefully you'll let me know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who was the first person to type a word into the chat, read my mind. Our opportunity being together is really a revisitation that we as an informed learning community are revisiting and coming together to revisit professional boundaries and ethics. So absolutely, that was the word that was standing out to me. All the other words are great too, but that was the word that stood out to me. Excellent, Ariel. Thank you for letting me know that. Yes. And these other words, communication, wonderful. A way of refreshing per the question you asked in the beginning. Yes, absolutely. And thanks for linking it to that. Perfect. All right. So let me cover one other thing, and then we'll discuss the two ponder points that I threw out. We will talk about and define professional boundaries. Our conversation, I'm confident, will focus on maintaining professional boundaries. Nested within all of that will be directly and probably indirectly why professionalism is important and the dangers of dual relationships. So I'm confident that our conversation will reach across these four agenda domains. And keeping that in mind, I'm now going to bring us back to, and I'll repeat, yeah, absolutely, Yolanda. Humility is critical, I think, to professional boundaries as well. I'm going to bring us back to the 2 points that I invited us all to ponder. I'll repeat them and be thinking about if you're willing to unmute and comment on one or the other. So the first one was, if this information does not dramatically update or change on a year-to-year basis. Why, for our licensure, our professions, maybe even our policies and procedures at our organizations, why are we mandated to, and I'm going to use the R word, revisit it on an annual basis? And then the second ponder point, and you can comment on either or both, is similarly, if the information doesn't dramatically change, what's the benefit of 103 of us coming together today to revisit professional boundaries and ethics?
So, Paul, I
Yeah.
think that I
Hi.
think that one I think that one of the reasons is we still seeing cases and we still see right now you report everything to Oasis. So for many years, when it's professional boundaries, now we have a way to report it. When I
Okay.
started in the field many years ago,
Okay.
it was professional boundary was not a training that was mandated, and it was
Okay.
no real way that you could go in and report when professional boundaries or when unethical was happening. And I think that they probably doing this because they think now that it's being tracked and it's being reported, they see
Yes.
more and more cases.
Understood. So you're really
Maybe.
making, but possibly, and you're making a
Mhm.
really strong case as to why there is an annual revisiting because of the reporting, because of the tracking.
Yes. And because they because of the tracking, it looked like they keep seeing these cases where they
Hmm.
want to make sure that for people that had been in the field for many years or for
Yeah.
people that are in the field now, it's like a fire drill,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Yep.
do it to make sure that when you get an opportunity, that
Yeah.
that may be happening for you to have that awareness, whether it's happening to you or whether you're doing it. Right?
Yeah.
Like a fire drill type of thing. Like, okay, this is something is going on here that is not right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know something, I've been doing having the opportunity to facilitate this learning community conversation for, I'm gonna guess, maybe, I'm guessing, this is a guess, maybe 6 years now. And you know, the whole time that I've done that, no one has ever used that analogy of a fire drill. And it is a perfect analogy. It's a perfect analogy, folks, because a fire drill keeps people safe.
Mm.
It prepares people to be safe. And I might, I maybe I'm going too far, but I would say that that's partly the purpose of revisiting this. It's a safety issue. Would you
And,
agree?
and I agree. And I'm going to, also it's different cultures, right? And I'm going to
Yeah.
share with you guys something that, if it's okay, maybe too personal, but it's something that I think it's important to have an open conversation here, right?
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
different culture. I'm from Dominican Republic. In Dominican Republic, you meet somebody today, and today you give them a kiss and a hug. That's how we grew up, right?
Okay.
So if
Yep.
I meet you, even I've been here for many years, but if part of my culture, we call people we say hi my love, hi my dear. That's how we talk. And
Yes.
if anybody here have met a real, a Dominican, they probably come across like, oh my God, I just met this person and she's giving me a hug. Um, for many years in the field, I remember telling my staff, hi, my love, hi, my dear. I remember cooking for them. Like, I remember showing appreciation in a
Hmm.
way after I started having this training. And I remember now I even struggle with that because when I meet somebody that is Spanish, I'm in Spanish, they want to come and they want to say, hi, Tanya. And I'm like, boundaries harass, I have to kind of
Yeah.
say, I'm sorry, I would love to do this. I never
Yes.
had that issue with patients, right?
Mhm.
I knew that that wasn't something that I could go and hug a patient, that I
Right.
knew, but what we struggling was that I couldn't do it with the people that I work with.
Yes.
So I
Your
don't know, so I
colleagues,
think
your coworkers.
my colleagues, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I think that also go deep into cultures. You may be doing things that may be interpreted a different way that it may take you a long time to be aware of that, and this training help, to be okay.
Yes. Yes. And again, and we're going to go to Yolanda in just a minute. Yolanda, don't lose your thought. But I really want to underline, because you're touching also on another element that we have to consider here, folks, is personal as well as professional boundaries, and how culture can also impact that. And again, thank you for sharing such a personal example. And also thank you for acknowledging that, like, the struggle is that personally, this is how I might want to express myself. And professionally, and again, I want to underline specifically what you said, because I think it was very insightful. Professionally, that could be misunderstood, or it could cross somebody else's boundary. And
And I'm
of
going to say
course,
the
yeah,
last thing before Yolanda talk is that
yes,
it's so important that you said that, because for me, the way that I was able to correct that, because it was so, I saw my office manager and I gave her kids for 10 years. Now I have to stop. So my front desk. So I remember that I stopped doing that with my own family and my own friends. So I
yes,
needed to stop it in my personal life
yes,
to be able to, it was too hard for my brain to
understood,
separate. So
understood.
sorry.
No, 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 no. Thank you. Thank you, so much. Yolanda, thank you. Yolanda gets the award for patience. Excellent. Go right ahead, Yolanda. Thanks so much. And Yolanda's in the process of unmuting, I think. She was unmute. There you go.
Yes, yes, yes. Happy Friday, people.
Or
So
happy
thank you.
Saturday, wherever you may be.
Happy Saturday Eve in my world. But anyway, this is very important. And like you said, as per your request, facilitator, I'm gonna keep it on the eye. And like from my personal perspective, it is important for me to like maintain inner self check-in, because like as much as I want to make, as I am a professional, like my
Yes.
personal stuff kicks in, like the transference gets real for me and the counter transference. So I always want to not, I want to always be able to, present my highest qualitative professional self and not my
Yes.
personal
Yes.
BS in every sense of the word. So like,
Okay.
and with that comes a lot of like practice. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like this mandation is a form of practice for me to always do what I don't want to do, because complacency is really my world. And like I tend to like think, because of these degrees and everything, like I got this and I find my niche, but my niche, I don't own this place. So it's imperative to abide by the mandations of to whom and where I work for, and like by the grace of God, they go I. So I don't never want to get too big, and humility is big for me. Thank you.
Yeah. And you wrote that in the chat earlier too, didn't you?
Yes,
Humility.
sir.
Yeah. And Yolanda, if it's okay, can I comment on something that you said?
Yes, sir.
So I love how clearly you stated, I'm a professional, and the transference and countertransference are still there. And
Yes.
I and that may, some people may say, like, hello, Paul, that's obvious, right? Well,
Mm-mm.
actually, I really appreciate that you said that, Yolanda, because I think I'm making an I statement here. I think there have been moments where I thought that somehow I was no longer susceptible to that. Yeah, and Sarah's really laughing at me for even saying that. And that's okay. I'm okay with that, Sarah. Um, and the thing I realized is I will never not be a human being, no matter how much training I have. And
Yes.
when I'm across from somebody, I potentially, my countertransference or transference can be triggered. And that doesn't mean I'm not a professional. It just means that professionals are aware of when their countertransference or their transference is triggered, and they maintain their boundaries. Yolanda, is that fair?
Yes, sir. You hit the nail on the head.
All right. All right. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Now I could go back on mute.
Anybody else want to add? Yeah, humility is a great form of strength. Absolutely, Ronald. Absolutely. Anybody else want to unmute and comment on either of those two ponder points? Olivia, is that a thumbs up or are you raising your hand? Either one is fine.
I was supposed to be raising my hand.
Oh, go right ahead. Go ahead. And by the way, thank you for doing that. And I see Frances is raising her hand too. But you can always just unmute. And I think Elkanah wants to add something as well. But go ahead, Olivia. You start. We'll go to Frances and then we'll go to Elkanah. Go ahead.
Thank you. I usually stay silent on these sort of trainings, so I just wanted to make my voice heard and also just bring to everyone's attention a possible scenario, because I feel like for me, I need this deeply. I'm a peer support specialist.
Yes.
I'm in a 12-step program.
Yes.
And I moved to where I work, this city in Vermont. I moved here for recovery, and I made myself known in my recovery community. And now I work in a recovery center, and every single one of my coworkers were my friends before I worked here. So I really I have my ears wide open. I want, I want to hear your perspective.
Are you still there, Olivia? There you go. You froze a minute. Yep.
Oh no, did you hear what I said?
The last thing I heard everything up into you said, I want to hear your perspective, and then you froze. Was there anything else after that?
No, I was just saying that it's a very challenging scenario I found myself in. So I'm excited for the rest of this conversation.
Yeah. And Olivia, if it's okay, before we go to Frances, can I just underline two things that you said, because they are extraordinary contributions to our learning community.
Yeah.
So thing number one, you did not use this phrase and you described it perfectly, which is dual relationships and the management of dual relationships. The other thing that I really thank you for, and I really want to thank everybody who's spoken so far for really being so generous from your own personal experience. That's what makes the richness of the learning community. Olivia, you acknowledged that you're a person in recovery and that you do your work benefiting from your lived experience and sharing your lived experience, your peer. And that adds a whole other level of consideration in terms of boundaries and managing boundaries, because you have a foot in both places. And it is an intentional and conscious decision to establish and to maintain professional and ethical boundaries. And I don't want to make an assumption here, Olivia, and you can tell me, Paul, you're absolutely wrong. I'm going to guess that there are times when it feels like there's a gray area and it's hard to know how to proceed.
Yeah.
Was I accurate in that?
Yeah.
Okay. And you know something? That is part of what being a professional is. And it's navigating those undefined, gray kind of situations. And again, Olivia, the spirit with which you brought this to the learning community helps everybody in the learning community, because there are 107 of us together. And when we are in those professional boundary, and I'm going to say it this way, ethical dilemmas, we must share them with others. If the impulse is to keep it to yourself, be suspicious and work against that. Yeah. Olivia, thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to go to Frances. We're going to go to Elkanah. And then I think Abimana wanted to say something as well. If you still do, by all means. Frances, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm like so engaged, and sometimes I'm like, it takes me, I'm a processor, so sometimes it takes me a minute like for it to hit. And then I'm like, oh my God, that's so true. And then my fingers are not fast enough. So I apologize. But if you can repeat it for the people in the back, some things that just kind of like stood out, but I want to make sure I put the right wording in.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about understanding that we are humans and there's transference, counter transference going on. Did
Yep.
you add anything to that, or am I using this correctly, summarizing what you said there?
Francis, you are summarizing that correctly. And the only thing that I would add is that when transference or countertransferential dynamics come up, it is no indication that you're not a professional. It just simply means that you're a human being. And as a professional, you will respond appropriately so that you don't cross or erode boundaries.
That was another point that I wanted to make sure because I was like being aware.
Yeah.
And so I guess I may not be the only one, but I had I mean, I didn't look it up on the dictionary, but I had an understanding what professional meant, and you
Yeah.
just kind of like threw a rock at that. And so it
Okay.
really shattered because from before hearing what you just said in a couple minutes ago, a
Yeah.
professional someone was that like can compartmentalize like the personal life with the their work life. And now I'm understanding we're humans, we're not machines. And we need to be aware that we need to check ourselves in short. But having issues with, like trying to understand, and I felt conflicted
Yeah.
for some time. I'm like, I'm trying to be a professional, but I also the job that I do is because I'm doing it because I care, the families that we're working with, whatever. So
Yeah.
it's just like, is it personal? Is it professional? Like, is it wrong? Is it right? And so it's just you saying being aware, a professional is being aware, and then I I don't have any notes after that. If you can remind me what you said, being aware
It's sim
that
it's simply being aware of when you and you could say that it's countertransference or transference, but when you have some sort of strong reaction or you're pulled in a particular way, a professional will get curious about that impulse in themselves before they act, because
okay.
they will weigh. And let's think about two things in terms of what you're saying, Francis. Well, actually, three things. One, we all come to this work for very personal reasons. And for many of us, it's probably not for the money. I mean, we get paid, which is great. We get paid. But there are other things we could do where we could probably get paid a lot more if that's what we wanted. So we come to this work for a lot of different reasons, and they're very personal reasons and very powerful reasons. So that's one thing. The other is, I think that, being a professional is not a one and done. It's a lifelong process. And we grow as professionals. The more we do this work, the more we come together in learning communities, and the more we reflect on what we're doing. And then the last one is that part of being a professional and being an effective professional is bringing your humanity to the interactions with your patients and your clients. It's the greatest thing that any of us have to bring to the conversation. And we can do that in a way that is ethical, professional, establishes and maintains boundaries.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of comments, it's like, oh, you're taking this personal, or let's not take this personal. I'm just like, am I? And is it wrong if I am taking it personal? Like, you know, like when things are being mentioned, like, or something's going on, it's just like, well, yeah, I'm doing this work because, I mean, for me, I come from the same community that I'm serving. And I know that when I was growing up, I saw the benefit of having, you know, a safety net, someone helping me get to where I am today, and I want
Yes.
to give back. So is it wrong that is personal? So it's like, now I'm just like, oh my God, you just like open up my, I just had like an epiphany. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. We're going to go to Elkanah, then we're going to go to Abimana, and one of our colleagues, she was unmuted, and
I
then
was.
okay, and Mary Jo will come to you right after.
All right. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah, of course. I saw that you were muted. I don't want to lose you. I don't want you to lose your, if you want to say
It
something.
was just a rephrasing something that you said that I wrote down that maybe
Oh,
was what she was looking for. That's all.
okay, great. So hold on to it for just a second, and then we'll go to Elkanah, and then we'll come to you. Go ahead, Elkanah. Go ahead. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Paul. In my opinion, I think professionalism should be extended beyond the work environment in the context of this discussion. And to encapsulate on what the other speakers have contributed, the essence of professional boundaries, in my opinion, is to create awareness and for every professional to be well informed. You know, whether or not it's mandated, I think we should be well informed. So that's just my contribution.
Thank you. And you know, you do make a critical point, which is that for some of us, and this I just throw this out as a consideration, and I'm going to make an I statement here.
Yes.
I'm a social worker. I'm a licensed social worker. And even when I'm in my personal life, I'm still representing my profession.
Exactly.
And that's a consideration that I have to, I'm still a mandated reporter, even in my personal life.
Yes.
So, you know, if I was to see that somebody was going to harm themselves or harm somebody else, or was harming or neglecting an elder or a child, I would have to report that.
Yep.
And if I didn't report that, I would not be upholding the ethics, and I could be off the clock, so to speak. So Elkanah, thank you so much for adding that.
Yes.
Yeah. So Mary Jo, go ahead, please, if you're going to share, if you wanted to share with Francis.
It was just a little brief. You said if there's an inclination to keep it to yourself, like, I don't know if that is a sign of trouble. Like if you're feeling like this is some secret, like, oh, this countertransference, or this, I'm feeling flattered, or, oh, they're getting to me, you know, like we have it a ton where our clients are flirting because they want an extra cigarette or something like that. And meanwhile, you know, our younger counselors or CITs in a residential program are flattered and feel like they're going to be the ones to save them and help them. And like, that's not you. That's not the route, you know, you're going to ruin your career, your license over this. And the idea that when you said if there's an inclination to keep it secret is definitely the time to speak up was really important. And I took some other notes because that's really what we deal with all the time. It's our
and you know something, thank you for underlining that, Mary Jo. And again, it's human beings working with other human beings, and there are a lot of dynamic forces at play there. And we want to keep ourselves as well as the people we're providing care to safe.
Oh yeah, so important. I mean, it ruins treatment. It so ruins treatment.
And to Mary Jo, you also said this, and I want to underline it because I don't want it to seem like it's a passing remark, which is, and you alluded to this, Mary Jo, people lose their licenses.
Oh God,
for breaches of professionalism and ethical breaches. Meaning they no longer can practice. So that's a real thing. And and that can happen. So
Thank you.
again, probably Mary Jo, another rationale for the revisiting of this on an annual basis. Yeah. All right. Now, I know there was one other person, I think, that wanted to say something, but I think maybe they changed their mind. But if you haven't changed your mind, go ahead and unmute if you want. And I will certainly give you the opportunity. Eula writes, I agree with Mr. Elkanah. We always wear our professional hats throughout all times of the day. And there's more to that too. I just read the rest of it. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, there you are. Yes, go right ahead. Abimana, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say is just when you know your boundary, you are preventing situations to happen or problems.
Yes.
And when you do not know your boundary and you do not follow them, once the problems happen, you will be now reacting, and that is time consuming.
Yes.
And when you are following your boundary, your work life is balanced, you are not burning out, and you are efficient. It's what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you. Thank you. And absolutely. And keeping in mind that boundaries can help maintain, and I'm going to use your word here, can help you maintain that balance between work life and personal life. So boundaries can help support that. And they can also have a direct impact on your wellness and well-being in both of those places. And I will also throw out that that's where self-care and focus on your self-care really matters. Francis, I'm not sure, I have heard that term. I'm not sure if there's something that you want to say about toxic positivity. And please feel free to unmute if there is. And Yolanda just wrote in the chat, I never want to be a disservice by not seeking out my supervisors or board members just to check in certain positive and challenging situations and or circumstances. I no longer allow my ego to depict what I feel and think. Any person, place, and thing should be reprimanded or praised. I do not have all the answers. The one thing that I have learned throughout my professional lifespan is that the only wrong question is the question that I fail to ask. And John adds, professionally, there are no gray areas. There is ethical and non-ethical, the canon of ethics. Someone else may have said it, but if you have to think about something being ethical or non-ethical or add your interpretation, it's not ethical. Thank you for sharing that, John. Elkanah also adds, professionalism should be extended beyond the work environment in the context of the discussion to encapsulate on the contributions of other speakers. Boundaries as a notion creates awareness and helps professionals to be well-informed. I believe self-care is essential in the professional life. I could not agree with you more. Yes, yes. And you know, I think ethical canons or guidelines, I don't know about everybody in the learning community. I'm making an I statement here. As a licensed social worker, I have a definitive written out code of ethics. And other professions, I think, probably have similar codes of ethics that you follow. And again, they are guides. And then there is also interpretation of those guides and the carrying out of actions based on those guides. So again, we do have codes of ethics. Excellent. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, folks. I'm going to ask everybody, and there are 105 of us, so if you can just, when you think of the word ethics, just type the first thing that pops into your head when you hear the word ethics. And there's no right or wrong here. I'm just asking you to play the word association game. What's the first thing that pops into your head when you hear the word ethics? Morals, safety, framework, integrity, boundaries, trust, moral code, morals, the right thing, equity, healthcare, morals, integrity, morals, moral principles, morals, boundaries, confidentiality, doing the right thing when no one is watching. Thank you, Lizzie. It's been a long time since I've heard that wonderful phrase. Protection, moral responsibility, morals. Okay. Integrity, professional. Yeah. Yep. Excellent. Now, I'm going to pose, and I'm inspired to do this based on something that and before we talk a little bit about boundaries, I'm going to pose this question. And I'm posing this question, and I'm imagining it's possible that some people may have personal experience or strong reactions to this. Okay? So let's say you're a provider. Here's the scenario. Let's say you're a provider and you're, just for the purposes of our conversation, you're a case manager. And you're providing services to a particular client. And you find out that the client does not have money to take public transportation to get back to their house. They're going to have to walk. And you have a car. And it's very bad weather. And I'm going to ask all 106 of you to weigh in on this. So, Pamela, you're not going to be able to escape this one. I'm kidding you, Pamela. Mary Jo, I haven't even asked the question yet. And Mary Jo says no. I haven't even asked the question yet. and Francis also wants to respond already. All right, excellent.
We know.
And that's okay.
We know. Don't do it. Look.
Yeah, but you know what I'm going to ask, right? So my question to you is, it's bad weather. They don't have the money for the public transportation. They're going to have to walk. You have a car. I'm also going to make it even more difficult, Mary Jo. You're leaving at the same time they're leaving. Yeah, Pamela's like, great, Paul. Thanks for adding that detail. So my question to you is do you give them a ride or do you not? And I'm going to ask everybody to weigh in the chat, and then I'm going to hand the floor over to Mary Jo, and then I'm going to hand the floor over to Francis. So we're going to we'll give people just a minute to put in the chat what they're doing, and everybody look at what they're putting in the chat. And I'm seeing a trend in the chat. Yep. And I really want to thank people for weighing in. I really, really want to thank people for weighing in. It's fantastic. Mary Jo, the floor is yours to comment on this if you choose to or not.
I would not personally give them a ride, no. And I wouldn't want our staff to do that either. That would be prohibited. But we do have a method for some drivers when a person needs a ride. So we would be able to help them get a ride. We could call, transport agency or something like that for them also. It happens a lot for us. And we won't leave them hanging at the bus with no money.
Okay.
That's terrible to do for them. We wouldn't do that. So we would try to help them anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Mary Jo, can I ask you one quick follow-up question before we go to Frances? Because I don't want Frances to explode before she says what she wants to say. But would you be willing to and then we're going to go to Sarah. Would you be willing to entertain one follow-up question before we go to
Sure.
Frances?
Oh, of
Okay.
course.
So my follow-up question to you is what is your rationale for why you would not give them a ride?
I think that would be like mostly it would be preferential treatment. And it does open some people up. You know, it does open up to an allegation if I'm alone in the car. Now we have plenty of people alone in the car with someone who is also a driver, and they always ride in the back seat, and there's conditions under which we'll provide a ride. But they could also still make an accusation in the car. But I mean, people are alone together. We can't prohibit that.
Okay. Okay.
So that's the rationale. But we wouldn't leave them. Like, and I was thinking about when you asked the question, like when we said like it's behavior or doing the right thing, you know, like a human right thing to do is you don't leave somebody in the bad weather with no ride, with nowhere to go. That's just a human normal thing. You just don't do that to people.
Yep.
Right. But it's not a regular people relationship. It's a relationship that's regulated. It's a regulated relationship. And so we follow the rules.
Yes. And Mary Jo, thank you so much for sharing the rationale as to why you would make that decision. And I'm really glad to know that in your setting, which is probably not the same as everybody else, other people's settings, you have several resources that could potentially help somebody out in that situation. So,
Yes.
so thank you so much for starting us off in terms of people commenting. And again, thank you for thinking it through and verbalizing your rationale as to why this boundary has been established. Thank you so much. Frances, go ahead.
I stepped out for a moment, and when I heard this scenario, I was like, I just experienced this a couple of weeks ago. So on top of all factors, no street, we're walking through like what do you say, like places that are not paved roads. It's just like you're walking through like 2 feet, 1 feet tall, like I don't know, weed. I don't know what they were.
Okay.
But I was presented to that with that situation, and you know, I'm still learning about, you know, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable where I work. That we do have an agency van, but we cannot provide transportation from our personal car. Even if I was allowed to do that, I would, you know, not allow it, just because my car has a lot of stuff that identifies me. There's a lot of things that I don't want other people to see, because I have things that I put in that I do in the weekend, or, you know, just things that it's not for anyone else to know. And if someone were to, you know, if someone I'm serving would to see that, you know, then it's no longer me serving them, then they're worried about me or whatever. I'm not trying to be saying like I have what is it saying? What's that word? Things that will get me in trouble. It's just that there's parts of me that, you know, no one, you know, so I try to,
it would be an unintentional disclosure.
Exactly.
Which would not serve the relationship.
Exactly. Yes. I didn't know how to say it, but
well, that's why we're here together.
Exactly. So I'm like, I can disclose certain things. Like, I want to normalize mental health issues. Like, hey, you know, you're struggling with it. You have a child that's struggling with ADHD. Look, I'm you know, someone who's like, you consider as a professional, I have ADHD, and you can see that I'm managing my, you know, diagnosis and later on in life or stuff like that. But anyways, going back to the scenario, the mother that I was working with did have a bus pass, because DCYF does provide bus passes, and she is DCYF involved. However, she took the wrong bus stop, ended up going somewhere, and myself and my other coworkers met her where she, you know, got out of the bus, you know, stop,
Yep.
And we continued the meeting there, but she's like, I don't have a car. I don't, can you provide transportation? I can't do that. But I was already processing and like figuring out, okay, how can I solve the situation once the meeting is over? And what I kind of remind myself, like, I can hold someone's hand in their journey, but I cannot I'm not a savior. I want to show them like, hey, when a situation is presented, how can we problem solve where I may not always be around or someone else may not be around? How can we do this? And so we walked maybe 30 minutes trying to find a bus stop. I had to get an Uber afterwards because I was like in pain. But I think that what I was like, I'm not allowed to do that, and I'm not going to do that because I don't. So it was not an issue for me, but I was like, okay, what can I do? So I was like, you know what? She's in a situation, meet her where she's at and try to support her as much as possible. And it was a learning opportunity for both of us, actually.
Absolutely. And I also want to say, Frances, that that's another hallmark of a professional, which is a professional is able to review what happened and draw the learning from it. So that can be another hallmark, I think, of a professional. And Frances, before we go to Sarah and then to Caroline, I wanted just to underline one other thing that you said, which is, and you didn't say this directly, but you described it beautifully. Doing the professional and boundaried thing is not always the easiest solution. It can actually require much more planning, work, and effort, and it maintains the boundary. And it doesn't compromise the client or the worker. And it's not always the easiest thing.
No.
And sometimes the easy thing is the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Frances. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I am, in spite of my old age, I'm a baby therapist. I'm a new therapist, new to the profession, new in my work setting.
Great.
I am in very rural Northeast Wisconsin, and there is no Uber, there's no Lyft, there's no public transportation. There is, thank you for the welcome. There is, I believe, transportation for those that are on Medicaid, but it is a lot of, and it gets really cold. Yes, amen. That's the other thing. It's cold, it's icy, it's nasty. So I guess I'm kind of playing devil's advocate. I don't think there's really an answer for this, but I think it's easy to say, find them a resource, get them on public transportation, get them a lift, get them a family member or friend that can.
What if you don't got that?
Yeah. So I guess I hear everything that you have said. I've seen everything in the chat as far as accusations and the slippery slope, and I hear all that. I guess I want to just put that out there that those options as far as resources, and that's a scenario I hadn't considered. In one of the clinics where I'm at, we do have a case manager, but she's split between like 5 different clinics. So that, maybe that's the easy answer to, well, ask your case manager. Well, she might not be here, or she might be off, or whatever. So yeah, it's a good question now to ask how to plan ahead, for sure. Yes, it's a tug of war between ethics and boundaries. Yeah. So really good scenario, and definitely something to think about, because transportation is such a huge issue in this area, like overall, because we're so big and so spread out.
Absolutely. And Sarah, I was really hoping you'd be here today, and I'll tell you why. Because it's so important for us to consider, and you've put such truth to this in terms of what you just said. It's so important for us to consider the context within which we provide care. And some of those have resources available to them, and others of those contexts do not. And there can be a huge distinction between more rural or more urban areas. And it doesn't mean that we're still not all responsible for considering and establishing and maintaining the boundaries and the ethics within the context of which we're delivering the service. And Sarah, the fact that you're here and you bring this perspective, and I'm sure you're not alone, you bring this perspective, it's critical to understand, because the beauty of ethics and boundaries is that there is a way to figure out how to proceed that will protect Sarah, the worker, and protect the client and the profession. But that answer may not be as obvious as, oh, just call Uber. Or just, it may mean the development of some other kind of service, if that's even possible. It could mean a variety of things. But the fact that people are saying, hey, we've got this human service delivery problem, and how are we going to ethically and professionally and with boundaries meet these needs? And sometimes there are gaps. So Sarah, thank you so much for putting that on the table, because basically what you've really helped us to look at, as well as Francis, what you brought to the table too, is how we have to be mindful of how we could be drawn into dual relationships with clients.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have to hop off, but I so appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Caroline, the floor is yours. Thank you for your patience. Go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Go right ahead.
So I had put in the chat that it really may depend on the role that you play at your agency, because initially my gut thing was, no, I'm a clinician, I would never do that. But you know what if you're not a clinician? I heard some folks saying that they were peer recovery specialists. So they may have a different set of boundaries than someone who is in a more clinical role. And what if your job is like the van driver for the agency? Then like it may be a no-brainer that of course we would give the person a ride. So I think it really depends on what your role is within the agency. So what are your personal professional boundaries that you're abiding to, because what is correct and maybe a no-brainer for one may be different for somebody else.
Completely. Again, based on your role within sort of the constellation of service delivery. Could I ask you one quick follow-up question? The same question that I actually asked, and then we're going to go to we'll go right to you. The question that I just want to pose to you is your initial response based on your role was no.
No, right.
And I get it. And again, my question to you, and it's really my question to everybody, but my question to you is, and thank you for being willing to entertain this, why was it so clear and easy for you? What's the rationale or the justification for you for that role?
It's actually the same thing I was thinking about before when you were when somebody else was talking, that my thought about, like, I'm a social worker. There's a clear ethical code of ethics, so I feel very safe in that, because it's very there is gray area, I think, but I think that because there's guidelines, it makes things like that kind of easy, because we don't want a dual relationship. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where we could either put our client at risk for victimization or put ourselves at risk for liability for something. So I think, having those guidelines is very protecting, not only for our clients, but also for us as the professional.
Okay. So again, keeping you as the professional safe in addition to keeping the client safe.
Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, go right ahead. The floor is yours. Urtuana, did you want to add something? Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I provide services in a city, right? So what happened to me a lot, and it's so hard, is that I keep finding and I oversee the clinics, but since I was a counselor, this happened. I keep finding my patients in the train. And I keep finding them in the supermarket, and I have find them, outside of a place. And although when it first happened to me, I had not addressed that with my patients at the beginning of the beginning of the relationship, because I was very new. So when, eventually I realized and I took training, I'm like, I need to have this conversation of what's going to happen when I see the patient, right?
Okay.
So, but what I always do, and it had gotten me very late to meetings, very late to go to work, I will leave the train and wait for the other train. I will leave the supermarket if I can. And I think in one of the situations, so I try to avoid it, but I do have those conversations with the patient because I don't want them to feel ignored. So I have if I will see you in a train, I have the whole conversation with them before it happens about the boundaries. But, it's something that happens, and I choose to not be uncomfortable in that situation. I choose to wait for the next train.
Understood. Thank you so much. And thanks for adding that, because that is another scenario that we sometimes consider is like, it's funny in one of the prior learning community conversations on this topic earlier in the year, somebody brought up the situation of running into one of their clients in a bar, and like how they were going to, because some providers enjoy having a drink after work, or enjoy having a drink on the weekend or whatever. And that, why should that be a problem for them? And here they were out having their Saturday night drink, and they run into their client at the bar. And it was, it almost sounds like the beginning of like a bad joke. The social worker runs into their client at the bar kind of thing. And it's sort of like, that would have to really be, awkward. And it would also have to really be like, how are you going to interact? Are you going to interact? Does it present a problem? And it would need to be thought through and considered. And sometimes we can proactively do that. And that's the benefit of having an ethical canon and guidelines. We can have parameters or outlines, and policies and procedures can be very helpful in regard to that. And Tiffany says, I would leave. Yeah. And again, understandable, Tiffany, that, that might be a choice that you might make. And there
can I explain that?
Of course, go right ahead. Yeah.
Well, the reason is if I'm in the professional stance and my client is in the same environment where we're supposed to be letting loose, right? I would definitely leave, because then the next appointment, maybe hypothetically, that client might feel that they can say certain things to you that's inappropriate, or bring up what they saw in your professional setting, like, oh, I saw you dancing with so-and-so, or something along the lines that would make people look at you differently at your work setting environment. So I would definitely leave if that was me.
Understood. Yep, because you wouldn't want it to be misinterpreted or misunderstood. Yeah. Yep. Okay. And Jesse asked earlier, Jesse, I saw what you said in the chat. Thank you. Yes, there are slides these slides will be shared with you. Once we, receive your completed evaluation, we will also send you your certificate and a copy of the slides. And I will just underline too that the slides, I've included in the slides, which we may not actually review, but I've included in the slides so that they can be a post-training support, a couple of almost like checklists or reminders of these are some specific things to keep in mind, so that they are actually meant to be a tool that you can refer to after this learning community conversation as well. Okay. Esther wrote in the chat, I had a coworker who lived in the same apartment complex as a client, and that was always a bit awkward. Yeah. And again, it's absolutely, Jennifer. It's probably unavoidable that there will be awkward situations. And I guess the thing I want to throw out for consideration, it's figuring out how to manage the situation. And again, we can only really control our side of the boundaries. And, you know, clients and patients do not ascribe to our particular codes of ethics. They're not expected to. So I'll give a very concrete example there. And I'm thinking of Tiffany as I say this. We're responsible in terms of confidentiality in regard to their information. They're not bound by the same thing. So Tiffany's example.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a perfect example, Tiffany. That client is free to say, report anything that they want to, or say anything that they want to. They're not bound by any code. Yeah. Yeah. So just keeping that in mind. Yep. Understood. Yep. Yolanda's mentioning also that I have a couple of clients who attend the same church. Again, we can run into clients anywhere and in any situation. Leroy writes, it's possibly best to inform the client that there are situations that we may run into each other outside of work. It would be best to inform them that outside of work hours, you have your own personal priorities. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I'll add to, and Leroy, I'll add to that and tell me if you're okay with this. I might say also something to the effect of, you know, and if, let's say I was talking to Sarah for a moment, and Leroy, tell me if you're okay with this, but if I was talking to Sarah, if Sarah was the client and I was the worker, I might say, you know, Sarah, I'm really glad that we're working together. And I just want to acknowledge that there is a possibility that we may see each other in public settings. And I want you to know that as a professional, I'm not going to go up to you or acknowledge you. And it's not because I don't value our professional relationship, and it's not because I don't respect you. It's because I want to keep you and your information safe. And our relationship is a professional relationship. So I just want you to know that I'm not in any way intending to be rude or disrespectful. Our professional work happens here, and you have your private life, and I have my private life. So Leroy, are you okay with that? Does that, you know, explaining why and letting the person know, does that make sense? Or
yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because you know, it stays professional. It keeps the confidentiality there, and then it also helps set the boundary between, you know, the professional and the client right there. So yes, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. And you know, the other thing to keep in mind too, and I'm going to just throw this out there for consideration, because I don't want to forget that I'm a human being, that there might be a part of me, if I do see that person in public, I will have to like resist possibly my impulse to say, oh, hey, Sarah, how are you? Great to see you. Because maybe I like Sarah. Maybe I enjoy working with her. I'm sure I would like her. maybe, you know, so I need to, I am the one who has to maintain the boundary, not Sarah. And that sometimes is work because I'm a human being. Angela, do you have any reaction to that? Any thought about that sort of the public situation? Angela Clay, anything that you would add in regard to that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you had any additional thought or you had any reaction to sort of managing maybe my own human impulse, because I enjoy working with Sarah as a professional, managing my own human impulse to say hello in public, even though I've already set the boundary. Does that make sense, or does that seem like am I, speaking out of both sides of my mouth? Or
Yeah, that happened to me with a client.
oh, it did.
Somewhere, yeah.
Okay.
I work in a program where we just work, the kiddos is our prime client.
Yeah.
And of course, the parents, because we have wraparound services, we also help the parents as well. But I remember going into Marshall's. I live in a very small community, and I saw her, and she looked at me, and we smiled because our agency policy is we tell them at the initial contact that if we see you out in public, we won't say anything to you because of confidentiality. But if you speak to us, we'll say like hi. And so she just saw me and she smiled and I smiled back at her. At our next session with her kiddo, I had said, hey, I saw you, but because of our policy, I didn't say anything. And she was like, oh, I knew that. I said, okay. I said, because it's, I want to acknowledge you as a human that I saw you. But at the same time, I needed to respect our confidentiality and not say anything because I didn't know who you were with, or because as soon as you say like, who is that? You say hi to somebody that's with someone else will say, well, who is that? Who, so, and she said she understood that, but I'm glad that we have that initial policy down in um, our agency, but I'm from the South. And so I live in the Pacific Northwest area. So, it's really, when you see people, that thing is like to acknowledge a person. And out here it's kind of like not really a big deal. People see you and don't really want to say anything, but culturally, a lot of people who are from different areas, it is natural for them to want to like engage.
Yeah.
So I just try to keep that professional boundary. But I have the desire to want to say hi. It just feels weird to not acknowledge a person when you work so closely with them.
Yep. Yep. I totally, yes. Thank you. Thanks so much. And I really also want to underline, and thanks for sharing specifically from your own experience, that you have a policy in your setting that lays out that parameter. So again, keep in mind, folks, ethical canons, boundaries, policies and procedures, all these different elements keep you safe, keep the client safe. Sarah writes in the chat, I've had clients come up to me in public to talk to me, and I've been with my husband. It really caught me off guard, and they introduced themselves to him, and I stated they were a friend. What should I do in that situation? That's a very tricky, Sarah, it's a really tricky conversation because you don't want to disclose to your husband, right? And it's interesting because it is kind of such an awkward situation. Yeah, or John is suggesting in the chat, say I know them from work. And it's so interesting because saying you know them from work could be a kind of disclosure. You may remember that I said that I began my social service career working in HIV and AIDS. Well, if I said I know somebody from work, that potentially could have been interpreted as a disclosure about their HIV status. And so much so that when we mailed people things from our organization, we had special envelopes that didn't have the name of the organization, didn't have any kind of branding. It was simply just the address. And even sometimes that got challenged as a disclosure because people knew what the address meant. So just keeping that in mind as well. So Sarah, my hope would be that would be something that you might discuss with colleagues as well. And I'm so glad you're bringing it to the learning community because it is a tricky situation. And again, Sarah's doing what the professional does. They consider the situation, they reflect on the situation, they reflect on how they responded in the situation, and then they determine what's the best way to go forward. And that's probably one of the best ways to avoid the slippery slope, is that process of, well, that felt really weird. I'm not exactly sure what to do there. Let me talk with other people, and then let's figure out how I go forward in regard to this. Juliana, go right ahead, and then we're going to go to Brianna as well. Go ahead.
Hi, Paul. Interesting
Hi.
conversations. And I do want to apologize again. I'm having some issues with my screen, but I do love this conversation.
Not a problem.
Excuse me. So I just wanted to reflect on what the feedback we had. And there's a close shave, a gray area between boundaries, professional boundaries and confidentiality.
Yeah.
And I'm reflecting on somebody meeting you out there in the community and asking about and wanting to greet you.
Yeah.
My own take on it is that if the person is coming forth to me with that information, with that greeting, and the person is trying to share their experience of what their a former client or former patient of what their experience is like, I will just listen. I will listen and just say thank you so much, even if you're in a public area. Other people are listening to that conversation because it's that person, is the client that is forthcoming with that information to me, as long as I am not going to that person myself. Then I also wanted to say, just to comment, I've been listening to all the conversations. I work in law enforcement, and a lot of the laws there are a little off, we are not bounded by confidentiality. So we also, but as a professional working in that field, also have to be mindful of how we work as licensed professionals.
Yes.
And then I always say that boundaries are always there. We as professionals need to protect our boundaries. So our understanding and learning today of what boundaries mean has helped us to know, how do you protect your boundaries? You're aware that you have boundaries, but being also able to protect it ethically, professionally is very important. So the responsibility also lies on us as professionals. What do we take? What do we not take? So there's a whole lot of enmeshment in those conversations, but as long as we are aware of what ethics and what is right and what is wrong means, we're able to fit in any situation. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you. And I do want to underline something that you said before we go to Brianna, which is sometimes in those public situations, folks, if they approach us, they're making the disclosure, not us. If they're talking to us, they're making that disclosure, not us. And I love the fact that what you described was that I simply just listen. I'm not going to say, well, tell me more about the situation and let's do some casework right here. Sometimes, and if that client were an active client with me, when I had the next contact with them, and I'm thinking of Sarah as I say this, I would definitely want to work through with them the pluses and minuses of them approaching me in public and making whatever disclosures they were making, because that could be problematic, because you wouldn't want them to be disclosing certain things in regard to their work or their case, if that were the case. Brianna, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
That's kind of a good segue to what I was gonna mention, and kind of like a life hack that I use working in human services. I've been in the field for about 8 years, but I did have previous jobs in the community that weren't related to human services. So a
Okay.
lot of times if someone does approach me and maybe it's something that you don't want to kind of like out their information or what kind of services they receive, and maybe they don't remember how they worked with you if it was like a previous role. For example, I used to work in helping folks find shelter placement. So it wasn't an active caseload. It was more like a maybe 1 or 2 sessions, and then they move on and get case managers elsewhere. So I kind of just list like a resume of what I'm willing to share. And I'll even include things like a high school job. I worked at Tim Hortons as a child. That might be somewhere where you recognize me from. Maybe you're recognizing me from a role I had at Walmart, for example, something like that, where maybe that's not exactly where they recognize you from, but then you get into the agency that you work for and then still give them the choice to acknowledge how they know you and how they recognize you. Then they could either move forward with acknowledging that or being like, okay, well, it's nice to see you, and kind
And
of
move on, right?
moving it, yeah, putting it back in their hands and
It's-
then being able to move on from there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, that you're letting them decide the amount of disclosure that they want to make or not make. You're not pursuing it. You're holding your boundary. Yeah. And again, this keeps kind of coming back to me, Brianna, and I appreciate your example, that reminder, folks, that we're the ones for the establishment and the maintaining, not the patients or the clients. And I'm thinking of Sarah as I say this, because that may mean that there could be situations that we need to reevaluate or revisit in order to address something that occurs. Or do you want to go right ahead? And then I think Diana wanted to say something as well, unless Diana's changed her mind, but we'll see.
You know what is a challenge now? Probably for me, probably you're gonna cover it, is social media. I'm having a big challenge with that. I currently don't have a caseload. I'm more of an administrator, but I believe that I oversee the clinic, so all of those patients are mine. Instead of having a 35 caseload, I feel that I have a few thousand patients, and they all in my caseload as the supervisor that oversee.
Yeah.
So, but also we cannot survive without social media, right? And the way to handle social media, if I need to attract patients and to get the patients into the clinic, my patients are on Instagram. Right, that's where they are. So if I need to do marketing, anything that I need to do to get my CEO and my company, it has taken me a very long time to get them into, we need to do social media, and this is the way that we need to do social media. The patients want to see, the therapist in the office making a job, like they want to see the therapist walking, and this is how they exercise, right? They also don't want it. You cannot also do social media anymore that you don't use drugs because it kills your brain. People block you when you do that, right? So if you want to attract patients, you need to do it away. If you want to attract youth, you need to be doing TikTok, dancing a famous song in your office. That's where social media is going. So how do we do it? Right? How do we do it we can no longer, and by the way, I'm big in marketing, so maybe I'm a therapist, but I'm in management and marketing. Nobody's going to look at your social media if you're just saying, these are the fact about substance abuse. People are going to look at your social media if the CEO and the counselor are doing a joke in TikTok without breaking confidentiality, but showing, you get what I'm saying? So how do we do it?
I totally get what you're saying. And I'm going to type a word in the chat and what I also want to tell you folks is that in this slide deck, I think it's 1 or 2 slides that I'm including that I'm going to give to you. I'm going to share with you that specifically address social media and social networking, okay, that are kind of guidelines to consider. But there's a word that I'm going to type in the chat. And Diana, don't lose your thought if there is something you still want to say. But I'm going to type this word in the chat because this is what social media, hopefully I'm going to spell it right. This is what social media has done to the attempt to try and maintain I'm going to use this word, a boundary between personal and professional. And this is it. Blur. It's very easy for there to be blur. And Mindy, I agree, no blurring and very challenging. And people really have to intentionally think through what are the implications if we use social media? What are the implications around disclosure? What are the implications around safety? Because, you know, somebody once shared a story in one of the trainings about a patient that they mistakenly friended who almost showed up on their vacation because the patient knew from the stamping of their posted photos where they were vacationing. Yeah, believe it, Pamela, it was scary. It was true. But the patient didn't do it and then admitted that that's what they almost did. So it is a complex issue that requires a lot of thoughtful consideration. And again, I've included, which we will send to you, I've included a couple of guides that will give some parameters of consideration. And P.S., Caroline, I'm thinking of you because you're also a social worker and I'm a social worker, and there may be one or two other social workers, but I know that our NASW code, National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, has specific written guidelines about social networking and social media. Not every ethical canon does, but I know ours does because it's my code of ethics. So, Diana, the floor is yours. If you would like to say something or add something.
I kind of lost my train of thought, but
okay. Well, I'm so sorry. That's my fault.
Okay. Let me see if I can put it together. I did adult protective services for about 9 years.
Okay.
And that was one of the things that I kind of struggled with when I started back in 99.
Yeah.
Is running, you live in a small community and you run into people in Walmart, Food Lion, everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And I started out by trying, if I saw a client, I would just try to hide from them, literally hide from them to avoid that contact.
Yeah.
And as I, learned and grow, I figured out, well, no, you can meet them. If they say hello, it's perfectly okay to say hello. But what I found hard a lot of time with adult protective services, you're doing an evaluation and folks want to share with you. And what I would do, sometimes I would say, hey, can we meet somewhere more privately and discuss? Because sometimes with clients saying, wait till the next day, I'll call you the next morning, they may not even remember the important thing that right then and then they wanted to tell you. So, I would try to maintain that professionalism by saying, hey, how about if we go over here where it's a little more private, we can talk, there's a subway across the street, we can have a little privacy. So I think as professionals that we need to remember how we maintain that boundary, because clients don't know. They see you and they want to tell you something right then and there, no matter where you're at. So I think it's up to us to kind of say, hold up.
Yep.
Come on, let's go somewhere a little more private and have this conversation because we don't want your information all over Walmart or all over Kmart. So sometimes it's up to us to help guide our clients to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate because they don't know. They got a story to tell and they want to tell it to you whenever they see you.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, the idea, folks, that part of our work, and I love the word that you used, the guiding, in that situation. And we're helping that person contain what they're saying at that particular moment. Because again, and we're doing it to protect their safety as well as ours. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ronald writes in the chat, in all caps, by the way. Ronald writes in the chat, the blur concept is a line between professional and personal is not clear, and that the boundaries are porous rather than sharp. Being too involved and entrenched with a client can be harmful in spite of great intentions. Yeah, and it can certainly, Ronald, certainly, and it can certainly lead to that slippery slope where boundaries can erode. So, folks, I'm aware of the little time that we have left for our learning community conversation today. And I do have one scenario that I would like to share with you before we conclude. And trust me, I'll put it to you this way. I'm confident, especially within our learning community today, I'm confident that this scenario is something we could talk about much longer than the little bit of time that we have left. And because we're sending you the slides, and the slides are meant to be post-training supportive guides, I do want us as a learning community to at least review and touch on this scenario. Okay? So I'm going to move us to that scenario because I would like us to look at it together and take it apart a little bit and let it be kind of food for thought after the learning community conversation as well. So I'm going to share my screen in advance to that particular slide. And again, as I said, you are going to be getting all these slides that will give you these kind of basic bulleted parameters. And you will have these for your review and your reference and things that you can share. And you'll see as they're whizzing by you, they are the very things that we've been touching on.
Sergio was removed.
So this is the scenario. And I really, really wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of time in the learning community to look at this scenario. So I'm going to leave it up here. I'm going to let the computer read it to you. And then what I'm going to start our conversation with, and it won't unfortunately be able to be a long conversation, but what I'm going to start our conversation with is, what are your initial gut reactions to this scenario? Initial gut reactions to this scenario.
Sergio was removed from his biological parents at age 10 due to abuse and neglect, and lived in foster homes until his mother was able to regain custody of him when he was 15. Sergio is now a case manager at a social service agency. When he is assigned the case of Jonathan Chavez, he sees many similarities between Jonathan's history and his own. During his initial meeting with Jonathan's parents, Sergio discloses many details about his own history and informs the parents of the steps his mother went through, including inpatient rehab, intensive therapy, and taking psychotropic medication that helped her turn her life around. Based on what he has read in previous social worker reports, he informs Jonathan's mother that she sounds a lot like his mom and suggests that she be evaluated for psychotropic meds.
So that's the scenario, folks. Pamela, would it be okay? Pamela's like, no way, no. Pamela, any thoughts, any reactions that you might share? We'll see.
Yeah. You know, when you disclose yourself to a client, you take away the focus of them and it puts the focus on you. So I've always been very guarded against saying anything about myself. I mean, I could think it, I could say, maybe you could go do this, maybe you could do that, but I wouldn't refer it to my life at all.
Understood.
Because of that reason. Yeah.
Understood. Pamela, thanks so much for starting us off. And I'm so yeah, and Rebecca writes, yikes. I love the fact that we've had the conversation that we had before I shared the scenario, because one of the things we talked about, and several people have written it in the chat, is transference and countertransference. And clearly there's some dynamic going on here. Okay. So again, does anybody else want to unmute and share? And go ahead, Yolanda, go right ahead. Any thought, any reaction to this particular scenario?
Yes, so happy Friday, people. I am so enjoying it. And this keeps me on my toes, But anyway, like I can identify, I was put in a situation when I was early in my, like as a child, I was exposed to a lot of trauma. You know what I mean? And because of me growing up in the 60s and 70s, whatever goes on in the house, stay in the house. So I suffered many decades until I was able to like identify, what the 10% of the substance represented and what the 90% of my emotions involved. So like as I approached my mental health, seeking out mental health from a personal perspective, the counselor, which was a male counselor, like depicted like, oh, suck it up, that happened to me and look where I'm at. You know what I mean? So, I thought that was the right way to go, and in turn I relapsed. You know what I mean? And because I sucked it up and listened to it, because I thought of this, and see, mindfulness of our authority over people is key too. And that's why this training is mandated and necessary, because I don't want to become that. You understand? It's mindful for me to be checking in on my biases, because I'm human, I have flesh, and like sometimes the transference is real when I have a client. But like I said, the mindfulness and the professionalism that I seek out when I see them keeps me in perspective as how to maintain my professionalism while I'm with the client, and then go to my board or to my therapist and dish that, so that I won't be a harm to myself and to my client. You know what I mean?
I do. And Yolanda, thank you so much. Before we go to Avery, I just want to underline, there's so much that you said that was so important. And again, thank you for making a personal disclosure.
I just want to say this too. I'm sorry. Like with okay, I don't want to be, I'm very spiritual because like this is the way I got, but like when we don't, evidently what was happening to me as a child is not my fault. It's a product of generational transference. You know what I mean? So like when that happens, like what we do and what we speak and say from before we were here happens to us, and it happens to our children and children. So like I say that to say that I do things differently and spiritually, and I live this even when I don't feel like it, and even when I don't want to, because it's the right thing for me to do. And anything that I practice from a honest, wholehearted perspective, it becomes habitual, and like it just happens without my permission. So this is vital for me as a clinician.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And you're really identifying the process of growth that any worker can go through, because we sort of examine our own histories and we maintain boundaries of where we're not going to insert our history into the conversation with somebody else, that we're very thoughtful and mindful about doing that. And before we go to Avery, there's one other thing, Yolanda, that I really, really, really want to underline that you said that I thought was so powerful, is that when that worker spoke to you and basically inserted their experience and basically implied you should do it the way I did it. Exactly. And and very similar to what Pamela said, how that it ceased to be about you and was actually about them.
Yes.
And that's exactly what's happening in this scenario. The other thing that I just want to underline is that you also acknowledged that part of the journey of being a professional is seeking help from other professionals in order to not act out your past. Thank you so much. Avery, the floor is yours.
I was just going to say, from the recovery coaching field perspective, if you're going to disclose, it should have a purpose and it should be brief. And it seems like he's kind of using this situation to, like she said, act out his own past and deal with his own issues.
Yes.
And one other thing is, we also always talk about unsolicited advice and ask, offer, ask. So she didn't ask for his advice on what she should do or anything. So it could come off disrespectful, and it's just not helpful to the relationship or situation at all.
Avery, thank you so much. And folks, thank you so much for everything that you're putting in the chat. And before I say thank you, happy Friday, Saturday, wherever you may be. And thank you so much for your just rich contributions to this learning community conversation. I want you to, I'm going to throw out one thought that I'd like us all to be thinking about. And that thought is this: that if, and again, we could spend another 2 hours just talking about this, if we were all Sergio's supervisor. So I'm asking us to put that hat on for a minute. If we were all Sergio's supervisor, and this is just what I'm asking you to think about rhetorically, if we were all Sergio's supervisor and we were supporting Sergio through a process of professional development around his boundaries, the thought I'm asking you as a final thought, and again, you're just going to be thinking about it. Sadly, we don't have the time to entertain it more deeply. But what I'm asking you to think about is, and I'm going to use a word that one of our colleagues used so beautifully, is how would we guide this staff person in their journey of professional development? So it's a thought that I'm going to ask you to be thinking about. I cannot thank you enough for everything that you brought to this conversation. I'm going to share the last slide. Please scan the QR code and you can complete the evaluation that way. And my colleague Clyde Frederick will also put the live link in the chat. You can click on that. Once you finish the evaluation, please feel free to log off. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'm going to share the last slide with you right now. Thanks so much. And I will just remind you, we are going to make these slides available to you, so you will have these revisiting checkpoints to touch back to our conversation and also to touch back on this content. Thanks so much, everybody.